President Trump once again lashed out at the Russia investigation this weekend in an interview with Fox News' Chris Wallace.
The president said he's wasted enough time dealing with the special counsel investigation and that he will not interfere if the new attorney general decides to impede the Mueller team's work. Major Garrett has more.
It's going to be up to him. I think he's very well aware politically. He's a very smart person. He's going to do what's right.
President Trump said he would not interfere with Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker if he moves to curtail Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation.
I would not get involved.
Whitaker oversees the Mueller probe and faces calls to recuse himself because of past remarks like these, suggesting ways to hobble Mueller.
And that Attorney General doesn't fire Bob Mueller, but he just reduces his budget so low that his investigation grinds to almost a halt.
Something the president said he knew nothing about before he named Whitaker to replace former Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Those statements, they really can be viewed either way.
The biggest flaw, from my point of view, is that he was chosen for the purpose of interfering with the Mueller investigation.
California Democrat Adam Schiff called Whitaker's appointment unconstitutional.
This is an attack on the rule of law.
Firing back on Twitter and misspelling Schiff's name, the president noted that, like Whitaker, Special Counsel Mueller is also not Senate confirmed for his current post.
Your team is preparing written answers to questions about...
No, not my team. I'm preparing written answers. I'm the one that does the answer.
Mr. Trump also insisted written answers to Mueller came from him, not his lawyers. He said it was unlikely he would interview with Mueller or his team.
I think we've wasted enough time on this witch hunt, and the answer is probably we're finished.
Well, Major Garrett joins us now from the White House. So, Major, if Whitaker does not recuse himself from overseeing the Russia investigation and limits the special counsel's budget, how could we expect lawmakers from both parties to respond?
Well, lawmakers would rise up against that. Republicans have said that. Democrats certainly have said that. And the question of Whitaker's longevity in this role is really up for grabs. The president has indicated more than once that this is a very temporary appointment of acting attorney general, and that he will soon nominate someone to fully take on the position and obligations of attorney general and submit that name, whoever it is, to the Senate for full-blown confirmation, something that Mr. Whitaker doesn't have in his position now as acting attorney general. That's one of many points of contention raised by Democrats. So nothing has happened. Whitaker has taken no actions. There has been no demonstrated effort on his part to carry out that sort of theoretical approach of limiting Mueller's budget. But if that evidence were to surface, there would be, according to the words spoken in public by Republicans and Democrats, significant pushback.
And Major, the president keeps telling the press that he and he alone is writing the responses to questions from the special counsel. What do we know about the scope of those questions, and what does it mean for a possible sit-down interview between Mueller and the president?
So the scope has been whittled to as narrow a range of questions as the president's lawyers were able to negotiate with Robert Mueller and his team. Nothing about obstruction of justice. Why? Because the president's team has argued that from a legal perspective and under the Constitution, the president has very wide, if not completely wide, authority under the Constitution as the chief executive to fire anyone he wants for any purpose or cause he so cites. And let's remember, when James Comey was fired as FBI director, Comey said as much in his first statement after learning he'd been fired by the president, that the president's executive authority to fire anyone he wants is completely unchecked and doesn't constitute obstruction of justice. So the president's lawyers have essentially persuaded the Mueller team to confine questions submitted to the president about events before he became president of the United States, largely related to campaign activities. And that is under the general description of collusion. And the president said he's answered those questions. I can guarantee you, having spoken to the president's attorneys, they are scrutinizing those answers very closely. It is a collaborative effort by definition. The lawyers are not there merely to hand over the answers as drafted by the president. It is a collaborative process, and the attorneys tell me they will be submitted to Mueller sometime early this week, meaning today or tomorrow. Then Mueller will have a choice. Are these answers sufficient? Are they responsive enough? Does there need to be a second round of written questions and answers? And then does Mueller press for a one-on-one interview? The president told all of us who were gathered with him in the Oval Office on Friday that he doesn't think that will happen. He has no intention of sitting down, And he reiterated that in the interview with Chris Wallace on Fox that was published or televised yesterday.
So, Major, one more thing from that interview. The president went after retired Admiral William McRaven. Now, he's the guy who's the architect behind the raid that captured Osama bin Laden. He led SEAL Team 6. The president said that, wouldn't it have been nicer if we got Osama bin Laden a bit sooner? Can you give us a little more background on this feud? I mean, why did he take aim at someone that many people consider an American hero?
Because he disagrees with the president's orientation to this question of whether the news media is the enemy of the people. The president says, no, I mean the fake news media, meaning the dishonest news media. But as Chris Wallace said, most Trump supporters, most people in the country, and certainly authoritarians around the world don't interpret the language that way. They interpret it as the free press is the enemy of the people. And William McRaven said in a speech last February that was the greatest threat he'd ever seen to democracy. That idea that the commander-in-chief, the most powerful political figure in America, would so routinely and acerbically question and attack a free press. The president said, well, the only reason he did that is because he's a fan of Hillary Clinton, an Obama backer, suggesting, without any evidence, that William McRaven, this long-serving member of the United States military, 37-year SEAL, leader of this most important mission, had only one orientation to the question of the free press, a partisan one, meaning he's some kind of Democratic hack or something like that. Well, that the public can judge on its own. And the president really kept going back to that when pressed by Chris Wallace. Do you really mean what you say about a free press, and are you concerned at all about how authoritarian regimes are using your words around the world to limit press freedoms either through violence or arrest? The president said, I can only speak for myself. I don't have anything to do with the words I say about this subject. That's something else the public can evaluate, because clearly the president's words are heard and authoritarians around the world are using them as a defense for a much more aggressive approach in their own countries to either a free or a semi-free press. So all of this will continue to be a topic of conversation in and around the Trump presidency.
Major, you have no doubt seen, but I want to share with our viewers a response from Michael Morell. He was the former former acting CIA director. He tweeted this: correction needed to POTUS's comments today that McRaven should have found bin Laden sooner. CIA did the finding. McRaven's special operations did the getting. They moved within days of President Obama giving the order. Help our viewers understand, in talking to your sources at the White House, this is a president who paints himself as a supporter of our nation's military, but he has yet to visit troops in the field in Afghanistan, although he said to Chris Wallace that he was planning that. I want to know if you've heard anything from the White House about that potential trip. Also, he's disparaged POWs in John McCain's case. He's disparaged Gold Star families during the campaign. What are you hearing about how the White House intends to respond to these things, where the president says he's very strong on the military, doesn't visit Arlington, and now he's disparaging Admiral McRaven?
Right. The president said in that interview with Chris Wallace, nobody has been a bigger backer of the military than I have. What he meant by that is supporting it through more defense spending and encouraging arms sales around the world and using his bully pulpit here at the White House to extol the virtues of the military with some frequency. All of that is true. Also true are all the things you just mentioned, Vlad. And whether or not the president has a planned trip to Afghanistan and Iraq, I've heard nothing specific about that, but the president said he wants to do that, meaning either the plans were in place or, having heard the president say that, the plans are now being developed. That's sometimes how things happen here. The president also said about Iraq, I didn't support that war. Chris Wallace reminded him, well, the visits are not about whether you supported the war, but about showing a general sense from the commander-in-chief that you support the mission of those Americans who are deployed. The president's also ambivalent about the war in Afghanistan. He said so publicly. He tends not to like to visit places where he can't declare some sort of victory. That may be part of it. As for the Arlington National Cemetery visit on Veterans Day, the president says, I just got back from Paris. I had made a speech about the military there. He does describe it as a sort of oversight not to go to Arlington National Cemetery on Veterans Day. Probably won't happen again, I assure you, based on just what the president has said. He'll be there next year. But all of this does raise questions about how the president sees his role and what he says about the military universally. He says it's all good, it's all supportive, but in these very specific instances, it's less than supportive. And taking criticism from someone like Admiral McRaven, and putting it entirely in a partisan cast suggests that the military doesn't have a sense of larger commitment to these bigger American values like a free press. Well, everyone I've ever dealt with in the military does. And when they express it and get that kind of blowback from the president, it indicates a sensitivity, a defensiveness on the part of the president.
Yeah, indeed. Major Garrett, thanks a lot.
Thank you.